This is a message to Nigel Farage after what has been a difficult couple of weeks, but also it's a message to you because this is all about us trying to unite our movement and build something and take back control of this country. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through my observations of Nigel Farage's leadership and give a few ideas based on my own experience, but also what I've seen from President Trump and the phenomenal success that he's had so far. Hello everyone, this is Andre Walker. Once again, this video is sponsored by GliveTVPodcast. It's still got a terrible name, but it's a brilliant channel. Please do subscribe in the description box and comment on this video if you like what I'm saying. Now, first of all, look, I want to just be honest about something. I've been accused of being a Nigel Farage fanboy. Well, maybe that's true, and I personally do like the man. But also what I'm going to say is this. I'm realistic. You and I are the awkward squad. In fact, in reality, I'm proud that Britain has an awkward squad. I don't believe that we could have ever built the democracy that we've built, the system that we've built, the country we've built, unless we were fairly awkward and difficult and argumentative. That's why you often see that celebrities get built up to a certain extent and then get crushed, because once they've got a bit uppity, once we're sick of advocating how marvellous they are, then we start advocating for how terrible they are. It's just one of those things. If nobody argues one way, we'll be the first people to do it. It's just a British trait. So I think that, first of all, we're the awkward squad, and we have to accept that if we're going to build a successful populist, nationalist, patriotic, right-wing movement, then we've all got to be friends and recognise that the number one thing that you will do with me is be critical the minute that you think I get a bit above my station, and I'll do the same for you. So in that context, let me tell you what I think Nigel Farage needs to do as a leader. First of all, I've noticed with Donald Trump something. When I was a contributor on Sky News, actually I used to defend Donald Trump all the time. It was remarkably easy to do, even though people thought it would be very difficult. I'll tell you why it was easy to do. Because he would come in like an absolute wrecking ball, kicking off about various issues and saying stuff that sounded completely extreme. And then when you actually sat down and listened to the briefing from the White House press office, you would suddenly hear that he'd sent in negotiators to be completely reasonable. Let me give you an example. The ban on Muslims coming into the United States of America. Okay, so he said there was a ban on Muslims coming into the United States of America. That wasn't actually true. What he actually said was this: those Muslim countries that do not support the United States of America in properly vetting people for visas, they will be banned. And actually, there was a very small number of countries on that list, places like Iran. So what he did was he put the issue onto the table in a whirlwind, and then he would send in negotiators to be sensible. Now, I think it's reasonable to say, after what's happened in the past couple of weeks, that Nigel Farage, compared to that, is being risk averse. Now, I do accept that he has to be credible in order to be British Prime Minister, and perhaps that credibility is taken more seriously in the United Kingdom than it is in the United States of America. But nonetheless, that's my observation. I'm going to look down at my notes because I have made a couple in advance of this. I think also strategic use of the media is something else. What Donald Trump was able to do was take control and set the agenda. I think one of the problems that we've got in the United Kingdom, partly because of the way the media is controlled by both the BBC and Ofcom, is that any political party leader has to dance to the tune of the media. But we were really successful when we had things like Breitbart, and we still have that, of course, but also now there's things like GB News and Talk TV, and also a plethora of small channels like mine. I always think that people like me, Maya Touzin, Guido Fawkes and Paul Thorpe and all those people, we're almost like the local newspaper operators of the 1950s. So there is that media environment. So I think for me, the strategy that Nigel Farage should adopt should be similar to Trump, in that he should dominate the media and basically just ignore those bits of media that are just not helpful. And I think that it's harder to do in the United Kingdom, but certainly something that is possible to do. Also, engaging with populism. One mistake we make in Britain, which this channel does not make, is that we always say, well, I'm the reasonable one and those guys are awful. do not make the mistake of criticising our own team. I know some of the Zionists go too far. I know Tommy Robinson's team sometimes go too far. I know that not everything that UKIP has said and Reform UK has said and the right of the Conservative Party has said is perfect. But let me tell you this, there are 100,000 left-wing commentators out there to criticise these people. Why do we criticise our own people? I wouldn't do it. I think we can't be picked off one by one, and I think Farage sometimes has to accept that he's going to receive criticism for associating with people who actually he doesn't agree with on that one particular point, but he's going to stick with in order to be collegiate. And I make this point about some of my reservations about Israel's strategy. What I haven't done is taken to the media slagging off Israel. The reason is because I can have that conversation privately, and the overall aim of defending Zionism and saying they're our friends is the important bit, and we've got a whole plethora of people to pick them off one by one. And I think Donald Trump hasn't stepped back from that in the way that perhaps Nigel Farage has weakened a little bit. And also, I think finally, what he needs to accept is this, that when Donald Trump came in for the second time, and by the way, I think that they did him a favour when he lost that re-election. However he lost the re-election and why ever he lost it, they did him a favour. And the reason is this, I think he was able to build a serious government. I mean, look, when Steve Bannon went to the White House, Steve Bannon is a good friend of mine. I always said, look, Donald Trump needs to drain the swamp, not drown Steve Bannon in it. And I think that Donald Trump realised something, that, you know, just electing an American president doesn't resolve the problem. Just electing Nigel Farage doesn't resolve the problem. And I think we're expecting far too much from 5 members of parliament. And I think we're expecting far too much from Reform. What we've got to start saying to ourselves is, what is the political hinterland here? You know, how do you create a broad base? You know, as an example, if I were you, rather than complaining about Nigel Farage, I'd run for council, simply because having lots of councillors knowing what's going on the ground is enormously useful. I've also said something else, and I know you don't believe me. Watching videos like this and learning a bit more about the political process is also incredibly useful, because it means that when you go to a local party debate in, you know, Reform UKIP, the Conservatives, the DUP, or whatever it is that you do, then actually you've got that little bit of extra knowledge. And if you multiply that by, you know, 100,000 people, then that becomes phenomenally useful. And so I think we need that broad base. And I think also what you've got to do, you've got to think, who is the all-star cast that we bring in as a government? Who is your Lord Chancellor? Who is, you know, if you look at, as an example, special advisors, probably 2 or 3 for the big departments, at least 1 in every department. Who are those people? Does Dominic Cummings create a transition team? Now, look, some of you like Dominic Cummings, some of you hate him. I personally think that deployed right, he's a good thing, even though, you know, he's a viper simply because he's the awkward squad. But, you know, is he the chief of staff for the transition team? Do you say to him, look, develop the manifesto, develop the team, and then we'll move you to be a UN ambassador as soon as we enter office? Question mark, I don't know. But that's the sort of thing you need to be thinking about. What is the legislative agenda day one? We've never talked about this in Britain in terms of the first 100 days. But remember, the reason we've never talked about a first 100 days in Britain is because we've always thought of the civil service as neutral. Now the civil service aren't neutral, and now that we can't guarantee that the system of appointments, say in the House of Lords, is going to be reasonable, we have to start thinking in terms of how you push through a legislative agenda and how you write it in advance, in the assumption that your own civil service can't write it for you. Of course, in America, the reason they can't write it for you is because they've not been appointed. Whereas in Britain, the reason they can't write it for you is because they're against you. So those are my tasting points. And I want to just make another point to you, which is this. I'm deeply saddened by the way the Conservative Party has let us down. I think the UUP and the DUP have also made significant mistakes. But I think what we've got to do is be realistic. What are we going to do here? Look, I think Rupert Lowe had a lot of good points, and one thing that he definitely did was, you know, using the Parliament, you know, in order to push forward his agenda. These 900 parliamentary questions. I thought his his 10-minute rule bill on quantitative easing was phenomenal. Very few people in the past, probably 50 years, have used the 10-minute rule bill to propose a serious piece of legislation, but he did it. And I think that is a good thing. But also what we've got to remember is part of your job is to pull together behind the leader. That is something that really we're going to get nowhere if we don't do. And much as I am not a fanboy for anybody, I'm a fanboy for our movement. I think we have to accept that if we're going to criticise the leadership of Reform, if we're going to criticise the leadership of UKIP and the DUP and the Conservative Party, it has to be principally with the aim of making them better and ensuring that they're ready for government. And in my view, I genuinely believe that if it's not Nigel Farage, it's not going to be anybody. And so I think that he needs to change based on these things in order to win. My thoughts, put your comments below. Also, I'm going to put a link to the video about this new Patriot Fund and about the national tour. Please do watch it. Don't have to donate. Please do watch it. And of course, also subscribe to GliveTVPodcast. Until next time, goodbye.